Nerida, good morning. How would you sum up the year for the industry?
Look, it was certainly surprising. It was far stronger than anyone expected. You know, when the first lockdowns hit in March, I certainly don't think anyone thought that there would be pretty much no price declines in most of Australia. So, you know, going into the pandemic and where we ended up at the end of the year, it certainly has been surprising.
Now, various states and territories, they introduced a number of incentives to get people into the market. Have we seen a record number of people looking to buy their first home?
Yeah, look, first home buyers were the most active group during 2020, and a lot of it had to do with the 5% deposit scheme that was introduced in January. So prior to the pandemic, we certainly did see lots and lots of activity from that group. But the pandemic really didn't slow them down, and a lot of it had to do with lots of government incentives. We saw a lot of state government incentives extended throughout the pandemic. We also saw the introduction of schemes such as Home Builder. So of all the groups, they certainly were the one that showed the most activity during the year.
And what sort of an impact has the pandemic had on people who are trying to sell their homes? Has it at all hindered that, or has the homes being sold actually improved?
Look, it has been a good year for home sellers. We certainly did see a slowdown in activity early on in the pandemic. People were very uncertain about the outlook, and that did tend to slow things down. There are also some structural impacts. You know, we did see auctions shut down across Australia early on. Victoria was unable to do live auctions. Also, the ability to inspect homes did slow down activity a little bit. But in the end, we did see prices, as I mentioned before, we didn't really see prices fall to anywhere near to the extent that many people expected. So it did make, by the end of the year, sellers very confident, and so much so that we saw the most auction activity all year just in the week before Christmas. So, you know, we'd never seen so many auctions take place so late in the year.
And what about in terms of the rental markets? How has that fared?
Yeah, look, the rental market has been very, very weak. We have seen, on one hand, prices increase. In a city like Sydney, 95% of suburbs are now seeing house price increases. But if we look at the rental market, 3/4 of suburbs are now seeing unit rental declines over that same time period. So similarly to commercial property, you know, we are seeing this mismatch between what's happening with tenant demand. With the rental market, most renters are younger. They are more likely to be exposed to job loss. They are more susceptible to things such as the end of a lot of the government programs aimed to help people through this period. So, you know, on one hand, the capital markets have been strong, interest rates have been low, access to finance has been easy, has been far less restricted. So prices have continued to increase, but the rental market has been very challenged.
A shining light of sorts, Nerida, has been regional Australia, and during the first lockdown back in March, I recall many people were moving to the regions, buying out properties, big properties, to go and isolate on these big homes. Do you think that trend will continue into next year, people looking for the isolation life in regional Australia?
Yeah, well, see, regional Australia has been, a very positive story over the past 12 months. We did see early on that people were searching more, people looking for a little bit more space. Changes to the way that people were working have enabled people to live more freely in terms of location. The northern New South Wales area has been really the star performer. If you go to places like Byron Bay, we have seen these huge jumps in pricing, but in every other state, similar trends. Places like Margaret River in WA, if you go to South Australia, we've seen places like Mount Gambier do really well. Wollongong, Central Coast, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast have all seen very big jumps in pricing. As to whether it will continue, I mean, there's a few issues. I guess the first one being that at some stage people will be called back into the office. So that freedom in terms of being able to work anywhere is unlikely to remain the same, particularly once we get a vaccine and particularly once our CBDs open up. But the other issue is that people are unlikely to have to, office workers particularly, are unlikely to have to go back into the office every single day going forward. So at the moment, what we can see is places like the Central Coast doing really well, because seeing prices in Wollongong continuing to move. One of the areas that has seen the biggest jump in activity has been the Mornington Peninsula. So, places like Blairgowrie and Portsea, which have traditionally been holiday destinations, are now increasingly housing people that are choosing to live there permanently.
Yeah, it's amazing how the market has changed people's outlook on what they want, perhaps when it does come to owning a home. Just finally, Nerida, what does the outlook look like for next year? Will the trend of continue of people looking to buy?
Yeah, look, it does. At this stage, it does. I mean, we can certainly, every year, we hit the end of December and, we make predictions. And certainly last year, no one could have predicted what happened with COVID. But at the moment, it does look like prices will continue to rise. I mean, we're not really seeing anything on the horizon to suggest that will stop. There's no interest rate increases expected. We're certainly not seeing banks become more restricted on financing at this stage. I guess the great unknown, of course, is COVID as to what happens with outbreaks. And, we've seen on the northern beaches over the last couple of weeks that conditions can change very, very quickly, and we can go from having a very open economy to a not so open economy. I think the good news is that these outbreaks are now a little bit more expected, and governments are getting much better at handling them. So it does bode well for the economy, and it does bode well for economic growth, and fundamentally that is really what supports housing.
Yeah, good to hear. Well, what a year it has been. Nerida Conisbee, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.